We are so glad you're here and that you've been listening and loving the episodes so far. I've told 1,000 stories, but I've never told mine. So I am thankful that you are taking this journey with us. And you remember last week, I talked about getting to write books and how that was such an answer to prayer. But I wrote 4 true crime books before I finally wrote a novel. And in my mind, it was the kind of book I wanted to write, but I got rejection after rejection after rejection. Like the publishers that were publishing my true crime, they said, wow, I mean, we really like the story. It makes us laugh, it makes us cry, but it doesn't have, you know, gratuitous material, it doesn't have sex, it doesn't have language, and we just can't publish it as women's fiction. At the time, that's kind of where that defining line was. And so I was kind of in a funk. And then I had a friend that worked at a Lifeway Christian bookstore. And she was one of the buyers for fiction. And she was just all about it. And she said, Karen, I think you need to write Christian fiction. I think that's what this book is. And of course, at that point, I was a new believer. And I didn't even know what Christian fiction was, I'd never heard of it. And my friend said, let me change your mind. And so she pulled a copy of Redeeming Love off the shelf of that Lifeway Christian bookstore. She had me buy it. And she said, read this and then get back to me. And she challenged me. She said, once you read this, I think you're going to understand. Well, I read the book, Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. And when I finished the last page, I literally dropped to my knees and I just cried out to God to forgive me for thinking that somehow writing books for him would be second best in any way. And just to bless me with the chance to write books like that the rest of my life. And so it is my pleasure today as my guest to introduce to you Francine Rivers. Welcome to the show, Francine.
It's very nice to be here. It's good to see you again. It's been so long.
It's so good to see you. I remember where I was the first time I met you. We were at I think it was either, ICRS. They changed names,
Yeah.
CBA, ICRS. But we were at one of those events and someone pointed out, oh, see that woman over there? That's Francine Rivers. And I just had this like, you were the celebrity for me that I had never thought I would actually get to meet you, but I knew how much your book had changed my life as a writer. So I made my way over and you were so kind and so sweet to me. Like, do you remember then my second book, Waiting for Morning, you read it and you endorsed it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's been
it's kind of
exciting watching you too. I remember we were talking about children because you had children and you were trying to write, balancing that time with career and motherhood can be a real zinger.
Yeah, it really can. I was obviously, younger then, and the kids were still little, and it was kind of a miracle to be writing anything, I think, at that point. But I had so many stories in my heart. And, for those of you who don't know all of Francine's work, certainly look her up. I'm sure you've heard of Redeeming Love. If not, you have to read it. Some of my favorites, The Atonement Child, the Shofar Blue, Mark of the Lion series. And, when you look at your career, what are some of the things that stand out in terms of letters from people or moments of epiphany where you realized just how great an impact you were making on the culture?
Well, I think for me, it was a shock with Redeeming Love because I never made the connection between sex trafficking and the book. I thought I was writing about something that happened, 150 years ago. And I got so many letters from women that were in that lifestyle or trying to get out, people that were abused. I was hearing from people where they were using it in ministries. And really that, I think your readers can really educate you. And that's what was happening with that particular book. But I, like you too, I tend to start with a question and I'm using the writing as a way to worship the Lord and asking him for his perspective, and the characters are playing out all the different points of view. So we're really blessed in the kind of thing that we do because it forces us to be with God that much more. It's part of our everyday life. It's not devotion time in the morning for a while. You have to stay connected all through the day and when you're working.
It's been a hard year.
I fell in love with London Quinn in high school.
So many nights and tears.
She was in vitro, and there was another embryo. She might have a twin.
Hi. Do I look like London?
You can't change the past.
Every time that I'm with you, I was looking at London all over again. She always wanted me to find someone like you.
Thank God I do.
That's just exactly what it is for me, that I invite the Lord to be part of the process and to go before me. And I often feel like a stenographer, like I'm just capturing the story he's putting on my heart. Have you felt that?
Yeah, very much so. And usually it takes me, I have to finish the entire book before I get what he's trying to teach me. I have that specific question in my head that I don't have any answer for, and I'm struggling with it in my own life. And then, it finally comes to me at the end.
I mean, honestly, honestly, that's the same for me. And it's like you're the only other person on the planet that I've ever heard say that. Like I get asked in interviews all the time, how do you work God into your story? How do you kind of patch God into your story? It's like, no, I take a question like, how would you survive, a drunk driver killing two of your family members? How do you survive that and keep your faith? And then God answers as I work it through the story. So I completely agree. Well, take us back to the beginning, Franny, about how, you're writing, you're successful, and you have a moment where you say, I need to change this storytelling and it needs to be for Jesus. I know you've told it 100 times, but I'd love to hear
well,
your story.
you know some of that story because my BC writing career was steamy historical romances. When Kathleen Woodwis came out with her book and Flame in the Flower or whatever it was. So that's where I started my career. I had majored in English with an emphasis in literary writing and minored in journalism because I knew from childhood that I was going to be a writer, but I didn't know what kind of writing I do because I didn't like to read, which is, I know, kind of different for a lot of writers that they all love to read. But it was actually Rick's parents. The whole family, they're avid readers, and they were giving me fiction, Gothics and romances and historicals and all that. And my first book was basically a combination Western Gothic romance, but it wasn't until I came to Christ that I started seeing that, writing is really a tool. It's a bridge to explain what God is trying to teach in his word. And the hope is, and I know it's true for you too, that people read your story and then they want to get back into scripture and investigate for themselves. And that's where they meet the real thing. The real love story is through the Bible, and that the Bible points to Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. People will ask me about it. Like, what separates you from a person who's writing a secular fiction? What's the difference? And I say, well, a secular author can write about the physical, intellectual, and emotional aspects of a story. And I'll do all of that, but I will also write about the spiritual. And I'm not going to bring you scenes that are gratuitous because if there's an affair, if it's happening, suffice it to say they closed the door, and 2 days later, the whole world knew there was a problem or whatever, however that might play out. But we know what sex is, and we understand these scenes. We don't have to paint those graphically to make the consequences graphic. The way that they play out in a person's life. So give me the stories that you write. Do you usually always see a piece of your own story in them?
Usually, yes. I'm usually primarily one person in the story, and it's usually the struggling Christian, the one that doesn't have the answer, the one that messes up. That's usually who I am.
Yeah, I completely relate.
In Mark of the Lion, I identified more with Julia than I did with Hadassah. Hadassah was the person I want to be eventually, but I don't usually identify with the one that's perfect. Far from it.
Right. I mean, and I feel the same way. Like I remember I had a conversation with a woman at a Bible study when I was a new believer, and she was just full of joy. Like the Holy Spirit shone through her eyes and her words. She was calm. And somebody in the room, so I was new, I'm all new to everything at that point. And somebody said, that girl, like that woman, her husband and her daughter were killed in a drunk driving accident. And it was a guy had been mowing his lawn and drinking beer the whole time and had to go out and get more gasoline and just, in that one moment's decision, she lost part of her family. And but she's taken a Bible to the jail where he's being held, where this drunk driver's being held, and gave him the Bible. And I'm like, whoa, like that's another level of faith that I'd never even considered. So when I wrote Waiting for Morning that you endorsed so gratefully and so graciously, all I could think of is I'm the person on the other side of the room going, how in the world?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's the thing that's going to help the readers relate, because that's where they would be coming from.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is faith doesn't come from easy times. It comes through hardship and suffering. Right. The people that are the strongest and the most brilliant lights are the ones that really have been through a lot. I see that in the church people that we know, if they really glow, they've come through persecution and hard times.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's even true in your own life. And before we talk about your own life today, what is your writing process, or has it changed over the years?
Well, it's changed lately because I'm a full-time caregiver for my husband who has Parkinson's from Agent Orange in Vietnam. And so for me, writing right now is fitting it in where I can and moving my computer into the family room, which is kind of where I started. I mean, with children, I started a desk in the living room, and I just learned to focus. It was the noise would actually help me focus, if they were watching TV or playing games or whatever. And when I first began, I had one napping in the bottom. I had a military desk. So one was napping in the bottom drawer, and one was in a playpen behind me, and the other was in a cradleette behind the typewriter. I mean, that's how long ago it was, not computer. Wow. But so it changes. But I think as a writer, writers have to write, and we find a way. We find time to squeeze it in, and you keep that focus on what the story is, and then you just kind of pick it up and keep going with it. And eventually it'll get done.
Yeah. For you, is it like a movie in your head?
A lot of times, yeah, scenes. And I have trouble sleeping at night because it's just going in my head. Yeah.
So that's why you can pick it up again. Like people will say, how do you keep it all straight? Well, if it's a movie, you can see it.
Yeah.
It's so clear. Yeah. Yeah. I have a picture of myself.
Start again.
Yeah, exactly. I have a picture of myself writing one of my first books, and Tyler, who just directed our movie, Someone Like You, that's coming out April 2nd in theaters. He was just a little guy. He was probably 4 or 5 months old, and he's sitting on my lap watching me type.
Yeah.
So I can really relate to you. Have one sleeping and napping in the drawer, and one's, in a cradle. And it's just,
well, you had, didn't you have 5?
Yeah. 6 kids. Yeah.
So I only had 3. So yeah.
Well, we kind of cheated because we had, we had 3 natural born and then adopted 3 kids from Haiti. And that was in 2001. So they were like 6. So we didn't have to do the cradle stage for all 6. But, and I had a husband who just, I still have a husband who just so supports me on it. And I know Rick was that way with you, that supported everything you were doing. When did you know, oh, I think this is actually going to hit, like this is going to work for me with the after you became a Christian, after you were writing different kinds of books?
Well, my first book, the BC book, published right away. So that was fine. But when I stopped writing for the general market and started writing for the Christian market, or I didn't actually write for the Christian market, I just wrote A Voice in the Wind, and I didn't know where it'd end up. I actually stepped back probably quite a bit when I first started, because fiction was new when I came in. They were publishing, I think, Grace Livingston Hill, but when they were also kind of passing around my BC books, and some of them were asking, what are we doing?
Who is this?
I happen to have an editor that believed that, fiction really can be a bridge, and it's a powerful tool for sharing the gospel message, and they were open to it. But I remember one of the guys asking at Tyndale that, would you be willing to change your name and disassociate yourself from all the work that you've done before in order to be a Tyndale author? And I said, well, if people really like your work, they find out who you are. So it would be deceptive to do that.
Yeah.
I'd be very willing to write my testimony in the front. And he said, good answer. They wanted to get to know me, and they cared about me as a person in my walk with Christ. It wasn't just a matter of putting a book out there. And I've been with Tyndale my whole Christian writing career.
Yeah.
So
did you have anything with Multnomah? Was Redeeming Love?
I did. Redeeming Love with Multnomah. It wasn't right at the time for the list for Tyndale, but they have the Spanish edition.
That's great. Tyndale's, I mean, Ron Beers, the group there. Obviously, that's where I met, Becky Nesbitt as my editor. Was she your editor for a while?
I think she was involved in the editing too, because I know her.
Yeah. Well, Tyndale's a great, great publishing house. And I don't know, along the way how did you see success with that right away with Voice in the Wind?
Yes, I think it surprised everybody because it was different from what they were publishing. What any of them were publishing. I know was sent. My agent sent it to another big house, and they said, "We don't even believe she's a Christian. We don't want anything to do with her." They didn't want to talk. It was like, oh, okay. We know we're going to run into that, but that was the difference with Tyndale. They actually they flew me back to Illinois, and they met with me, a whole group of people. We just sat around talking. So that made a big difference. I feel like God just opened that door, and I told him, until you throw me out the door, I'm staying with you. So
I think that's so beautiful. Me, I've been with a lot of publishers. But I've loved Tyndale.
You've written a lot of books.
I've written a lot of books. I have. For a while there, it was like 2 a year. And I just look back and I don't see me writing. I did write. How quickly can you write a novel? Like your first draft, what does that look like?
A year, at least a year. Yeah.
For the first draft.
In some cases, in first draft, and in some cases I wrote, I think it was Her Mother's Hope and Her Daughter's Dream. The original manuscript, I ended up throwing it away because I didn't like the characters in it. And it was based on my family. I thought, I don't even like what's happening here. So I wrote it again, and it was so long that they said, let's break it into 2 novels. So that one, I think, was like 3 years, 4 years, something like that.
What was your word count from books like, Voice in the Wind, or for like the Mark of a Lion series? They were longer.
I think they're about 140,000.
Yeah.
But like with what is it? The Lady's Mind, the last one that came out, I had to cut like 75,000 words. I call it my COVID book. When COVID, what do you do as a writer? You write. We do that. We shelter in place anyway. We always have. But I just spent that whole year writing, and I wanted to write something fun and entertaining because it was such a serious time. We needed to laugh about something. So
absolutely. That your word counting and throwing that many words away. One of the most traumatic experiences I've ever had as a writer was a time when I had written about 12,000 words into a novel. I always liken it to swimming across the ocean. Like, I've done it, and I know I'll do it again, and I know how to do it, but it's still hard. Like, it's still and I don't want to go in the wrong direction. So, I want to make sure my miles are put in the right direction and that they count with all those kids running around the house. So it was early on, and it was maybe my 5th or 6th book. I'd written 15,000 words, something like that. And then my husband, Donald, came over to the computer. I don't know what he was looking for or doing. And I came back to the computer, and my document was blank. I said, honey, what did you do? And he said, well, I hit something and everything disappeared, but don't worry, because I saved it. Well, when you delete everything and save it, that's gone. Like, there's no, oh my goodness. I think I went through all the stages of grief, honestly. Like, okay, we called tech people. We tried everything we could. There was no way to get that back. So when you say deleting 70,000, like, a part of me just like, weeps for that. Like, where are those words?
But really, I enjoy the editing process. that to me is really exciting. Once I get the draft down and then I begin doing the work on it,
Yeah.
I find that a lot of fun. And even cutting, I mean, cutting those words, it was a challenge, but it was actually fun because I thought, well, I don't need that chapter and I don't need that chapter. So, it didn't bother me, especially after when I did the Lineage of Grace, I wrote Tamar first. And I threw that's another manuscript. I finished the whole manuscript. I thought, this isn't right. I'm going by Western commentators. I'm not getting the story that's really there. And I tossed it out and went back and started it all over again. Just sometimes it has to go in the circular file or in the shredder or whatever.
Right. Delete,
Yeah.
put it in the box, put it in the junk pile. I know for me, when I outline, now, do you outline? What is your early process?
I do kind of outline loosely, but it changes and they know it's going to change. And I'm sure it is with you too. You kind of have that outline there to give you an idea where you're going. And then you just let the characters take over because it's their story.
Oh, it's so true. It's so fun to talk to someone who gets that because, I'll be here crying at the computer over losing Ervil, just whatever the character is. And if they pass and my husband will walk by and go, are you okay? Like, my character, my character died. And he's just like, okay, you're in another planet. You really are different. But yeah, you're right. At some point now, I try to make my outlines really like I have to love the outline. It's going to change, but that makes me somehow it gives me like a sense of you're going to get this done. Like it's okay. You're going to get it done. And that mattered, to me as I would head into a quiet place and, it changed. I would write, I had a quiet little kind of closet type space off my room, my bedroom when we lived in Washington. That was, gosh, for 13 years. And so I could just go in there. Now the kids knew they had open access. Like, come knock on the door, come in, bring me a dandelion, ask me to come play basketball with you, whatever it is. I mean, they would come first. But my husband did a good job of letting them know when that was a good time to go upstairs. But I could write the first draft in 2 or 3 weeks. I wrote even now, let's see, even now and ever after. I wrote Ever After in 4 days. So that I could never plan that. That was just the Lord. Like I had just lost my dad. And so I was very emotional. And I didn't even know a person could cry that much, but that book was a military focused book. And it deals with the loss of a soldier who is a very sacrificial thing. And I just wept through the whole thing and I didn't want to take a break to eat or do anything. It just poured out of me. And the final book was pretty close to what that was. But again, I would never start my book 4 days before the deadline. Obviously, that would not work. But I do feel, there have been times, in fact, it was a Tyndale book for me that was one of my most difficult. It was the book Divine. And that was during the time when the Da Vinci Code was really popular and people were in the mainstream, they were questioning the divinity of Christ. And that was awful. It was a travesty to see that happening on such a main scale stage. So Tyndale asked me, hey, could you do a Christian response? Like, could you do like a modern retelling of the story of Mary Magdalene and get it right? Like show the divinity there that, however you would do that. And I said, okay, well, usually usually God puts the idea on my heart and then I take it to the publisher. But this was I almost had a sense of being commissioned. Like, we want you to do this. And I said, okay, well, since you have a vision, how about if I write you an outline and you tell me what you think? And they said, yeah, we don't want it to be like your regular work. We want it to be more of a mystery, a little more adventure. And I said, okay, I can do that. But, let's just make sure you love it. So I sent them my outline and they're like, yeah, we love it. That's great. And so I wrote it. And as I was getting toward the end of writing it, my brother died suddenly in his sleep. He was just 39 years old. And it was just on it was October 1st, 2005. And I was just getting ready to turn the book in and finishing. So I turned it in. I think I was like a day away from being done. And this was the only time this ever happened. Ron was one that made the call, Ron Beers, who heads up Tyndale. And he said, Karen, we love the writing. We love you, but we have to reject this. This is just, we're wrong. We really want it to be like a Karen Kingsbury book. We want it to have more heart, and less adventure. So they wanted me to scrap it and just start over. And
Oh,
my initial response was, thank you so much. And I get it, but I can't. It's like I'm in the middle of going through too much with losing my brother, and I'm just gonna have to say no and, give you the advance back or whatever. I just have to say no. And God would not let me sit with that. So, I got off the phone and I went and found a quiet place, and I could just tell that the Lord was saying, take the instruction,
you do this, yeah.
be humble, and write this book because it's going to touch a lot of people. And that's my book that kind of has a look at the forays of, like, trafficking and whatnot, divine. And so Mary Magdalene character, who's named Mary Madison in the book, goes through a lot. So I just took out the adventure storyline. I had to throw away lots and lots of chapters and redo things. But now when I hear from people who say they were in a spousal abuse situation or they were being trafficked, and this book was what God used, to change their life or to save it, every time I can just look up and give like a smile to God that
Yeah.
he wouldn't let me say no to that one.
Yeah.
So
Well, I knew you needed to be busy too. It's
I
hard to
knew that.
grieve.
It
Yeah.
is. That's right. You can grieve through storytelling too.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you that about Atonement Child. What was the reason you wrote that? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I had an abortion during college years, and I was still dealing with it years later. And I had become a Christian. I think it was 8 years into having become a Christian. I felt like, why does this keep coming up? I know you've forgiven me. And I felt that I needed to write the book. And of course, every character in the story is impacted in some way. And I was just dealing with my own issues. I was taking a course through our local pregnancy counseling center on survivors and people who have had, the post-abortion syndrome type thing. And so I had support around me the whole time. And it was actually the most cleansing book that I've written, because I was able to realize at the end that it was really God forgiving me. I couldn't forgive myself, and it kept coming up because I kept holding on to it. So it was, Rick was concerned about how the public would take it, and everything that I think that we were concerned about never happened. I got numerous letters from other women that have been through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think sometimes we have to go right into the darkest places of our life and take it to the Lord. And for us, we can use the writing as a tool to explore it and to ask all the questions we need to ask. And then God meets us right there and shows us what we need to know.
and people appreciate it because they can read the authenticity and the honesty through the lines of the story.
Mhm.
And then they don't feel judged. They feel like, okay, now I can see my way through this because she gave you the hope through the story. And, I often say, when Jesus wanted to tell you something straight, he just tell you something straight. And when he wanted to make a point, he might turn over a table. But when he wanted to touch your heart, he told a story.
Yeah.
And sometimes I hope that in heaven we'll have a screening room or an area where you can go and watch some of these things that The Chosen does a great job, but let's look at how was it really? And to be sitting at the feet of Jesus and hearing him tell these stories, I think many times it's easy to read them with a dry tone, and in reality, it would have been a tearjerker.
Yeah. Or laughter.
Or laughter.
I think there's humor in there too. Yeah.
My story, someday when we always talk about that. We have questions around the dinner table and we say, what would be the most fun thing to find in heaven, whatever. We have different ones, but that question, when it comes up, it's like, well, I want a screening room. I want to see, the Red Sea parted, and I want to see Noah on the ark and all that. Wouldn't that be fun though?
Yeah, it would.
You talk about your on-screen adaptations. That would be about
Well,
perfect.
not even just meeting and just seeing it on screen, but you get to meet them and talk to them. Find out what was it like? What was it actually like?
Sit next to Noah, and watch get a kind of play-by-play of what that was like. Oh, that'd be. I mean, there's got to be a way. These stories are too dear and too important to us as Christians. to not have some deeper sense, like in Corinthians when it says, now we know in part, but then we shall know fully, even as we are fully known. So I think that, well, I'm excited for all that to come. But my story that kind of took that route into the abortion situation and the pain of the surviving mom. I mean, the mom is the one that's going to go through this pain, and so many times convinced by either, the guy who was the father, or potentially just society and society's views that this is nothing, it's just some cells, it's not that big deal. And anyway, my story is I didn't have an abortion myself, but I drove a friend. A friend called me. She was 16, and I was not a Christian, but I knew better. I knew that this wasn't the right answer for her. She'd already had two other abortions. I knew that. And the boyfriend was supposed to pick her up. Her parents were out of town and he never showed. So she called me, and I was 2 years older. And at 18, I went and picked her up and I took her and I sat in the waiting room and waited. And I tell you, I went on after I read Atonement Child, I called the friend and I just wept with her on the phone and apologized for not being a better friend. I was older and I knew better. I knew that it wasn't going to be the right thing, but her appointment was made. I mean, I justified it all the ways you would, as an 18-year-old. But I wrote the book Shades of Blue. And it was about a woman who's a young teacher, is 26, and hasn't gotten over it. She just hasn't gotten over it. She takes a run on the beach every day. She has a white little cross. She
Mhm.
knows the baby was a girl, and she had etched a name onto the cross, and she's still stuck there. And then the guy who was her boyfriend at the time is about to get married. And it just hits him at the same time. It's, the Lord worked in both their lives that um, as he's getting ready to get married, he keeps being compelled with the thought that I cannot say I do until I go back to Holden Beach, North Carolina, and say I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so he goes back, and, they have these 3 days together and they grieve together, and she's able to find healing through Jesus. And he doesn't end up staying with her. He goes back and gets married. But at the back of the book, I wrote my story and how, you know, this is not we don't write books like this to shed a bunch of shame on women
Yeah.
who've had abortions. That's the
Yeah.
thing.
So true. So true. I remember doing an interview after the book came out, and the person was bragging about how they were doing this protest and marching through the streets and all that. And then you said, how do you feel about that? And I said, well, your church would be the last one I'd ever go to. And he was kind of shocked. And I said, you have to be willing to stand at the door when they're coming out after they've made the worst decision of their life and embrace them and love them there, not,
Yes.
shame them in the street.
Right.
There are a
It
lot of
doesn't.
people that do that. A lot of people do stand and pray and are there to love
Yeah.
these women. And there are more and more. And I don't think what people realize is that, the abortion impacts the woman. It takes the life of a child, but it impacts everybody around them. It impacts our culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's that we haven't yet seen. Anyway.
I completely agree. As a reporter, before I was writing books, I was a reporter, first a sports writer, and then I was a news reporter. And it was a weekend. I was covering a weekend beat. It wasn't my normal thing, and they had me go and cover an abortion protest.
Mhm.
And the stories that were being run at that time were always like these crazy, angry Christians,
Yeah.
holding signs, the end is near, and yelling at people who were trying to get into an abortion clinic. And so that's kind of what I expected to see. Even though I was a new Christian, I was really curious how this was going to play out. And I was 3 months or 4 months pregnant with Kelsey, our first child. So it was a lot of emotion to take to in a moment like this. So I go, and there were like these layers of things. So the first layer of people near the abortion clinic were sitting, silently protesting, and they had their arms length. They weren't yelling or doing anything, but they wouldn't move. So you couldn't come and go. They were blocking
Yeah.
the way. And that's against the law for them to have done. The next line of people were the ones who were angry that those people were blocking the door. And they were the ones chanting. And I can still remember they chanted two things that will always be in my mind, because I just put my hand on my tummy, and just was thinking about this little life inside of me. And they were chanting, unborn babies can't feel pain. Unborn babies can't feel pain, which is just, I mean, I closed my eyes and I
Yeah.
thought, wow, I've never read this story in the newspaper. Like no one's ever covered this angle. And the other thing they kept chanting was, if the Pope could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. They kept on chanting this.
Oh,
And they were
yeah.
waving hangers. And then the next layer of people were church groups, like you said, that were like, praying quietly, crying, trying to just bring a peace to the moment.
Yeah.
So the police came and they dragged away the people who were blocking the door. And I interviewed a few different people, and I wrote the story by what I heard and saw. And my editor was so nervous to publish it. He said, we've never, like, no one's ever talked about this. I'm like, well, how about fair journalism? Like, how about we show
Yeah.
both sides? And they got a lot of really good letters after the article ran, but they got a lot of hate too, because nobody ever sees that side. But at the end of the day, we as Christians can do nothing but have compassion for that. And I so appreciate, Francine, what you did with Atonement Child, and the way that opened the floodgate. I'm sure you still are getting
Yeah.
letters about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Mm.
hard because the same thing within the Shofar Blue, which had to do with the church and the things that are happening in a church. You the letters come and you wish they wouldn't, because you wish it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
It's sort of a reverse thing that, oh golly, here's somebody else that's been hurt by, quote, pro-choice, and there's less pro-choice now than ever before. And here in California, they'll fly women in, pay to fly them in, pay to lodge them, pay for the abortion, pay to fly them home. And the Council on the Future of Abortion is basically, their plan is to increase all the regulations on the pregnancy counseling centers and decrease the regulations on the Planned Parenthood and the clinics.
Wow.
So they want to make sure that they can get rid of the life side and channel them all down. And it's all about money. It's a huge industry. Yeah. Have you read the book Unplanned by Abby Johnson?
I saw the movie. I thought it was a great movie.
Yeah.
I thought that it was just shocking.
The book is really good. She was the head of an abortion clinic for Planned Parenthood, I think in Texas, for 8 years. And she thought she was helping women until she found out what the real purpose is to make money off women who are in crisis.
Right. And how much of it even is maybe more sinister when you look back at some of the, even racist roots that go toward the initial beginnings, of abortion, and the number of people that tend to come from, inner city or lower income or whatever. It's like, what are we doing? Trying to sanitize a generation, or what are you saying? Like, how deep and sinister does that actually get? And of course it does. And it's a trick and it's a lie, because the enemy is the father of lies. And so when you have a woman who's been through this, like I have more than one friend who's been through this, and it just does not go away. Like birth dates, how old they would have been, what they might have been doing. I mean, those things haunt you.
Yeah. I'd love to
Without the
see
grace of God.
on the other side of, the aftermath of abortion in the women's magazines. You want to do a real story on women? Maybe you should address that.
That's right. That's right. Or
But
ones
you don't see that. Yeah.
You don't see that. It's a sinister thing from the dark side of, from the devil. It just really is. And it's meant to create more than one victim. Like you said, it's not even just the mom. I mean, it's the family and extended family and the culture and the community. And who did we lose along the way?
We're losing a whole generation.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank you for that, because, this is life-changing fiction. It's what you and I do, and others that, write these kinds of books, where we're not content just to tell, a love story, although there may be a love story in it. Oftentimes the greater love story is the love story of Jesus toward us.
Yes, absolutely. That's the whole center of it. And I know you and I agree about that Christian fiction isn't just putting Christianity in there. It's the whole skeleton of the story. If you take Christianity out of it, it falls apart. Just won't work.
Absolutely agree. Yeah. Well, speaking of books that went into movies like unplanned, you and I have that in common now as well,
Yeah.
that, going from, of course, and how many, have you had others that were made into movies besides Redeeming Love that were on television?
The Last Sin Eater. And I don't know
Okay.
if it's ever been on television, but that one was done a number of years ago by Michael Landon Jr. and Brian Bird. Yeah.
Okay. But the bigger one, obviously, Redeeming Love. And what did you think of the whole process? What would you do differently? Would you want a bigger role or a smaller role?
Well, I wrote the script because we've dealt with a lot of different groups, as I know you've been through the same thing. You are looking for the right gatekeeper, and Cindy Bond definitely was it. But the scripts that I would read, they just didn't understand Michael. They didn't get Michael. They didn't get that it's an allegory. So I thought, well, I'm going to write a script and show them what I'm looking for, not expecting that they're going to use it. But they read the script and they said, well, we'll take this one. And then I wrote it as a linear story. Well, that would be too hard to watch on screen to see that whole backstory of the little girl. So DJ Caruso and I worked together and redrafted it and, just moved things around. And he actually did the scene where Angel goes up on the stage. The red dress scene.
Wow.
That's my favorite in the movie. It's just, to me,
me too.
every time I see it, it gives me goosebumps. But the whole process, Rick and I were able to go to South Africa and watch the filming for about 3 weeks. And it was an amazing process. I didn't really get involved. I just was there to watch because it's a whole different medium. And I had done my part, and now it was up to the actors to do what they saw in it. So I wasn't giving points to the actors or anybody else. It was just watch, enjoy, and then see what God does with it. The entire filming was done 24 hours ahead of the worldwide shutdown of COVID. So the next year was spent in the home studios and stuff to do the finish work. And then it came out very early, very soon after the theaters opened. So we were not able to go to the premiere in Hollywood. Our daughter-in-law and son put on a premiere here. So we had the red carpet and the limo and crowd and all that stuff here in Santa Rosa. But it was an amazing process. And I think it was never really intended for the Christian audience. My hope was that people would take friends that were not Christians and then explain Christ. And it was interesting because when we were at the premiere, the photographer that came was not a Christian, but he got the story. He was just, talking to everybody about the story. And my friends were kind of laughing about, he wasn't a Christian, didn't know anything about the Bible, but he understood what was being said, that it was all about God and the love of God. Yeah.
It's funny, as we set out to make someone like you, we decided the only way to really do it, because we've had several movies that were made, and very, very thankful for those, some of which I got to write the script for, some not. But we felt like was to open Karen Kingsbury Productions and just literally do the whole thing, pay for it, film it in Tennessee. And we had a conversation like that. My husband and I, we said, it's almost like, what if the world ends on day 20 of our 25-day shoot? Like, was this a good use of $2 million to spend on a movie, which is very low budget, but it was like all of our savings, And we decided, as long as we are being the love and light and feet and hands of Jesus to these people, the 50 people in our cast and crew, then the answer is yes, because God's in control of whether it makes it to the screen. We're set to open in theaters April 2nd, but you never know where things go. Like you have to hold on loosely and just go, okay, Lord, but who did it touch along the way? Was it a driver, a cameraman? Was it somebody who was on set? Then great, because that's what you have us here for. We have to be on mission. And what a joy and thrill it is to be on mission with Jesus, as any profession, a dentist or, a lawyer or a person at Walmart, whatever it is. But for us, it's storytelling. And now this new medium for me of storytelling through Karen Kingsbury Productions, actually on screen, has been just my favorite thing. Like I love it. It's been so
Well,
fun.
it will make a difference because that's one of the things that we noticed. A lot of the people that are the actors and the crew are not Christians, but they watch what's going on and they're getting the story. Because we had one of the young producers said, I don't know Jesus, I'm not a Christian, but it makes me want to be. And that was like, oh my goodness, and one of the actors that played one of the lead roles was saying it was the feel of being in that particular production was different than any he had been on.
Yeah.
So I think very definitely whatever you're doing, they're gonna feel it. Whatever
Yeah.
happens, the people, the crew and the actors and all that are gonna feel the difference.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, what would you tell your younger self just getting ready and started off into your writing career, starting with, you know, your first books as a believer? Is there anything you would change or do differently, or would you just say buckle your seatbelt?
I'd say buckle my seatbelt, but I believe that, you write what you need to read. For me, it's you write what you need to read. I don't think about an audience. I don't think about, I probably shouldn't say this, but I don't really think about the reader. I'm trying to figure out things for myself. And I think that most people are in the same boat with you. So if you're writing true to yourself and you have the Lord at the center, it does touch people's lives. That's the additional blessing.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that people will say, "Well, did you always get your message ready first and then you write a story to match the message?" Never.
Oh,
Never. I mean, even the movie Someone Like You, about two embryos separated at the petri dish. And then one becomes London with her biological family. One is given away to a fertility specialist and kept on ice for 4 years and becomes Andy. And that little girl has no idea that she's adopted as an embryo, and her parents, mistakenly never tell her. And now here we are. Tragedy hits with London, and the guy who was in love with her and never got to date her, but was in love with her. He was her best friend. Makes this journey into finding the other embryo. I went to an event. I was speaking at an event, and this woman had three little triplets with her. And my hostess said, "You see them? Those are embryo adopted babies." She implanted
wow.
three, and they all took. And so she's got these little babies. And she was a Hispanic woman, and the babies were all blonde. She didn't care what the babies looked like, and it just was, she wanted children and wanted to, she just
Yeah.
said, these are three that are rescued. And that began that question, like, oh my goodness, you can adopt an embryo, like,
Yeah.
all the what ifs. That's something. It's just,
Yeah.
so that's, I write the story because I need to read it. That's exactly it. And I
Yeah.
remember after reading your book, Redeeming Love, and hitting my knees, I remember thinking, even if I am the only one who reads these stories that I want, that I know what God's going to have me do the rest of my life. And even if I'm the only one, that'll be okay because I love to read a book like this. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for what you do. I mean it. And, talking about a movie releasing right after COVID, which was the worst time.
Yeah.
My son Austin, our youngest son, he was born with a heart defect.
Mhm.
And his story, we're going to talk a little bit more about next week on the show, how his entry into the world was. He came with this shocking heart defect, and he played football through 10th grade, but then he was, had that taken away from him. So we're going to look into that. I'm going to have Austin as a guest on my show next week, but he was in a movie called 12 Mighty Orphans by Sony, and
Oh, my. Yeah.
he had a pretty good
I
part, but it
like
came
that
out.
movie.
Oh, you saw it.
I saw that movie. Yes, I like that
That's
movie.
fun. Okay, so Austin is the mean bully.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in real life, Austin is not a mean bully, but he just does not look like an orphan. So they had to cast him on
Yeah.
he was the one. He scores a touchdown early on, and then he goes like, "Stay on the ground, you dirty orphan." I don't know if you remember, but he's
Yeah.
like the bully in the movie, which I can be sure to tell you was acting because he is not that way. He has such a
Yeah,
good
that's
heart.
cool.
But COVID definitely interrupted that movie as well because it came out right around that time. But anyway, if there's any way, Francine, that we can pray for you in this new season while you are being a caretaker for your husband, who is a hero, who fought in Vietnam and was exposed to Agent Orange and is more and more needing your time and your attention. How can we and all of my friends who are listening and a part of the show, how can we pray for you?
Just that he maintains that fighting spirit and
Mm-hmm.
that I can stay healthy, because my prayer has been that I can stay healthy and strong as long as he needs me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I would love to have us close with praying about that, and thank you so much again for your time, for being with me on the show today, and just getting to connect heart to heart.
Yeah, it's been great to see you.
Yeah, you too. Okay. Lord, we love you, and we thank you so much for Francine Rivers, for the impact she has made on our culture, for the countless number of lives, hearts that have been led to you, to a saving relationship with you, Jesus, because of the things you have given her to write. Thank you that she sees herself as the first reader. Lord, I know you cut us out of a very similar mold, and I am so thankful that I have had her to look up to. Thankful for that moment when my friend gave me the first copy of Redeeming Love to change my life. Just thank you for her impact, not just on me, but on all of the world, Lord. She is such a game changer. But now, personally, Father, I pray for her to have strength and health beyond anything she could ever ask or imagine as she cares for one of this nation's heroes, her husband, Rick. And his time in Vietnam has cost him and harmed his health. But Lord, he's still here. And I just pray, Father, that he would maintain that fighting spirit that he had back in Vietnam, that he would still have it now, that every day would still be a gift, Father, for both of them. Would you bless their home and fill it with your Holy Spirit, and give them more moments of joy and blessing as Francine continues to write stories that will change the world for you, Jesus. Thank you for her time today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Okay, so everyone, thank you for being a part of this episode and taking this journey as I tell my story. It's the first time I've done that, and we're thankful that Francine got to be a part of today's show. Next week, I'll have my son Austin on, and he will talk about what that was like to have been born with a heart defect and to have some very beautiful things that he loved in life, football and sports, and even a desire to be in the military, taken away from him because of his heart defect. And you might relate to something like that. So check back in with us next week as we bring you that show. And until then, you have a great day.